All right, the timing was a little off on the starting screen. Sorry, everybody. Welcome to the MasterClass, the Ask Me Anything with Lord Blight, your host. Thank you guys for joining. Here at Norton Gaming, we're all about making sure you guys stay safe while you're having a good time. I myself am a gamer of many, many, many years. I'm affiliate here on Twitch, raising money for kids battling cancer. That's all I do here. But I'm also the head of Norton Gaming, and I lead that initiative and that division to make sure that we're focused on bringing you the things that you need to stay safe. I can see some of you in chat that are part of our gaming group. So love you guys. Thanks for being here with us. But I'm joined today by somebody super special. I'm joined today here by a very good friend of mine. We've worked together for a very long time. It's my buddy Darren. Darren is the Chief Technology Officer here at Norton, and I'm going to read your bio, even though you told me not to, because I do think it's
Thanks.
important that everybody understands how lucky we are to have you here and what some of your credentials are. So, Darren is responsible for the technology strategy, innovation, and thought leadership. He is a global keynote speaker, a contributor at Wired, and has been featured at Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, CNN, and I'm telling you, many, many others. He might be one of the only people at this company that's been in more magazines and news articles than me. Prior to this company, he's had a lot of leadership positions in the company we both worked at, which was Symantec, which was the larger parent company of Norton. And he did cool stuff he can't tell you about. We used to have lots of really interesting conversations about things because he was doing strategy, research, and development. That was 15 years of that. And he brought a lot of amazing innovations that are part of products that either you're using today, the companies you work for are using today, or even some of the companies that you love that you buy your games from or you're buying your products from today are all a lot safer, keeping all of us a lot safer because of him and his teams. I'll just tell you, he's worked other places, and he's actually got a lot of degrees. He's a really smart dude. Darren, thank you for joining us today, buddy.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
So, Darren and I wanted to figure out like what do we bring to you guys today? Do we talk about video games? No, that doesn't make sense. Why would we bring Darren to talk about video games? But one of the topics that, he said, would be really cool to talk about would be facial recognition, because there's so much going on in that space right now. And I had an idea that did kind of tie it back into gaming. And one of the things we want to do in this masterclass is not just averagely play games with pros and make you bored of our gameplay, but be able to ask a million questions. We don't just want to talk to you about the things that are directly impacting you. We cover those things in a lot of places, including here. But we also just want to make sure that you're learning about cyber safety and security and interesting, wild stuff that happens across the entire world, and educate you as much as we can while having a good time. So for those of you who haven't followed already, make sure you follow. We're going to have the master class once the third Wednesday of every month, and we have a lot of gifted and gifted streamers that come and take over our channel, and you'll get to watch a lot of new people that you might not have seen before. So Darren, with all that said, buddy, I'd love to have you kind of dig into like not just the what is a facial recognition, though I do think some of that you got to share, but start taking us through the whole like where did it start, where is it today, why is this becoming a thing that we should be thinking more about?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first thing about facial recognition is just what is it? It's being identified by your face, right? And that's something that started a long time ago, and it stayed more in intelligence circles. It was being used in physical security applications, but now it's mainstream. It's about, geez, where do I show up in my photo library? How do I get into my phone and use my face as my passcode to enter my phone? It's when I'm walking down the street, am I anonymous, or does everybody able to link me to who I am? And then you combine that with things like social media, where I volunteered up so much of my information already. Like, what's my name? What do I like? What are my favorite music? And now what happens is you can walk down the street, a camera can pick you up, identify you, and then link you to your online and your digital presence, maybe even your physical presence too, right? So it's really that combination of advances in cameras, advances in this field called computer vision, right? And that ability to make sense of what those pixels are, and that ability to link it to all the information that's out there that makes, I think, facial recognition so important these days. And let's not forget, we're basically the beta generation of this, right? Whether we wanted to or not, this is the AI beta generation, and facial recognition is the tip of that spear in some ways.
Well, yeah, dude, it is crazy. I was, we had a tiny little restaurant that my oldest was running, and somebody said to me, "You ever worried about somebody breaking in?" I'm like, "No, there's literally a million cameras around here, and it wouldn't be hard for us to figure out who it was with a very, very simple methods, right?" But what that does kind of bring up is something that I remember happening a couple of years ago, where people had printed out masks of this one person's face. It was an artist who wanted to show you could defeat facial recognition. So he created this mask of his own face and then released it into the wild, and all these people printed it. Like, what I really want to know is, like, sure, if we wore the right mask, maybe we defeat facial recognition, but if you're a good law-abiding citizen, is there a good reason to defeat facial recognition? Like, do I really want my face everywhere?
Well, I think it's interesting you bring up a point about an artist doing that. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to defeat facial recognition, and I'm going to make a statement right now that may be a bombastic, but I'll back it up. We can dive into it, which is all AI, all machine learning is fundamentally broken. In the face of an adversary, a determined assailant attacker who wants to defeat the system will be defeated. And I know that sounds weird to talk about the failability of a technology that might be so important. But the point is, AI and ML is sophisticated mathematical modeling. And what you're really looking at are different levels where you can attack it. You can look at how is light bouncing off of my face and making it back to an optical sensor, right? A camera, and then being translated into a pixel. Okay, so let's just set the stage. What is an image? An image is just light being encoded as numbers. To a computer, they don't see like we see. A computer basically sees a big matrix of numbers. Okay, and so that pixel over here, that's red number 3122. And the one next to it is just a little bit a different shade of red. So 3021. And it's just this big matrix of numbers. And so all you have to really do is figure out how is the computer capturing those numbers, and then how can you manipulate it if you're an attacker to basically see something. And again, it's not looking at all those numbers. Facial recognition sits there and goes, okay, what does a face look like? Should it have two eyes? Should it have a nose, a mouth? Where should they be in relation to each other? And again, it doesn't know what a nose is or a mouth. It basically says, okay, an eye looks something like a circle within another circle, and a mouth looks more like a horizontal line, right, across. And there's a huge amount of variance in there because, of course, not everybody has two eyes. Not everybody's face has the same proportions, and so it's making guesses. And so the easiest way to defeat AI then is to really slip between, kind of the overlaps, the shadows, in that area where it has to make a decision and say, okay, is this one thing or is it another? And it's really at that point where it has to make a decision that a human oftentimes will say something like, well, gee whiz, I don't know. Or maybe I should get some more information, or maybe I should ask someone. A computer, at least today's algorithms, mostly just sit there and go, yeah, I got to make a decision. Is that Darren or is that a banana? Is that a sloth or is that a dog? And so you get these really weird things in that. So again, remember, you've got this matrix of numbers. It's looking for certain patterns within that. And so almost any attack that can basically push the algorithm to make a tough decision, you fall into this area where it's super confident and says, yeah, I know that that's a person. And I know without a doubt that that's Darren versus, a blueberry muffin. And those are the kind of choices where it gets in this gray area where we can push and say, you know what, it was like, 51%, it's Darren, or 51%, 49% that it's a Chihuahua or something like that. And so that's the interesting thing. So all the attacks have gone beyond just holding up a piece of paper where it's going to, oh yeah, that's a piece of paper being held up, or a cardboard mask, towards, okay, is that a face? Is that face attached to a human that's alive? And we can talk about that later in terms of deep fakes. And then it's that notion of, okay, is that face exactly who I think it is, and of what confidence? So the attacks, there's really three different attacks you can have here these days. One is, and some really good researchers, there's a guy named Mahmoud Sharif. It was at Carnegie Mellon, and then we worked with him in the research labs, and they came up with some glasses. These were 3D printed glasses, but they were specially designed. You couldn't just put on any glasses. I've got some glasses here. I could put them on, and facial recognition will know it's still me, right? That doesn't throw it off. That's not enough. But if you're targeted with the glasses, I can have 3D printed glasses that change, remember that matrix, and make it seem like my eyes are farther apart, or that I have elongated brow, or, and you can change the color. So I can change what it perceives to be my skin tone, or my hair, or not have any hair. And so you can use these specially 3D printed glasses. And to answer your question, well, let's say maybe I want to go to a protest, and I know I'm going to be out in public. Maybe I slip these glasses on because I don't want anybody to know it's me. Or maybe I'm walking around in my house and I realize right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras on me. Or maybe I'm in someone else's house and I don't, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to have responsible anonymity. And it's interesting that you could 3D print these glasses out. In fact, we thought about, why wouldn't I just make all my glasses like this?
Yeah, no
and people
doubt.
have done that, right? They made t-shirts like that. So that's one attack. Another attack would be that I hijack the signal, right? Forget about the physical world. We go after the digital world. And I could actually slip in additional pixels. Like I could be doing it right now. I could be running basically a camera filter, but instead of putting a mustache and a beret on myself, that sits there and makes everybody laugh, I could be strategically putting certain pixels in my face so that I can't be recognized.
Oh,
and I think there's a lot of promise around that.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, keep going. That's one that you could easily do at home.
No, you could do it at home. I mean, we have the filters. We actually there's two of our research did that. A guy named Sorb really led the work on that. And what we were originally thinking is, okay, everywhere I go, I mean, you and I are using avatars here too. But if I'm going to put my real face somewhere, do I really want it to be my real face, or do I want a synthetic face? And in many cases, I might want to put a synthetic face out there, just like I might not want to put all my real information out there. And so it's this kind of strategic disinformation about myself. Or I kind of think about it more as like selectively controlling how much information I put out there, and I modify how I appear to the online world. And this might help me protect from, let's say, someone taking this image and making a fake ID out of it. It might help it make it so that I could even watermark it in a sense, so that not only is everywhere my shows up, it's not being attached to me, right? Making it easier for someone to, like, I don't know, find me and find everything about me, right? Think about it this way. You've got a spider web with your face at the center. Maybe it could be your face, could be your name, could be your handle. And every little bit of intersection of that web is where another piece of information about you lives. Maybe where you went to school, maybe where you've lived. And what you can do by kind of breaking that is you're snipping those threads. And you can do that in a very targeted way to preserve your identity, your anonymity, and basically not allow some folks to track you. I mean, there's this story that was there was an app, it was called like Find Face or something in Russia. I don't remember the exact name. And what happened was you could literally be walking down the street, hold your camera up, take a picture of someone, and within a reasonable amount of time, it's going to pull up that person's social profile and display it to you. There's some good and bad that can happen out of that.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, I remember when Google. So we've got some questions. I want you to take these because they're directed at you. But yeah, I mean, I remember when Google came out with its image search and it was doing facial recog, and people were looking for police officers.
Yeah.
Right. They were like
looking for,
and then they were looking for. Yeah, I should have said, yeah, it was. And that got bad real fast, and they pulled that down, right? So yeah, that can get really bad. So let me read some of these questions to you. Hey, Vaughn, when we put, who was that first question from? I like to quote the person that asked it. Oh, it's right above it. So Don Shetty asks, and Don's one of our frequent viewers. Thanks for being back, Don. How do I compare which facial recognition is more secure? Say an iPhone has all the fancy hardware, but an Android One Plus phone I feel does an equally good job in recognizing my face. Are there any benchmarks?
Yeah, so there are benchmarks for any AI algorithm, but it's still an emerging space. And specifically, this is a great question, Don. When you're thinking about, in your case, it sounded like you were thinking about authentication. And so you might look at your phone today as being a low to medium assurance authentication device, right? Versus maybe Fort Knox would be a high assurance. And so then you can sit there and say, on a device like a smartphone, it's actually been tuned to reduce the friction and the pain of a false, negative versus a true positive. So, in other words, in many of these consumer devices, they're really expecting not too many people to try out your phone with different faces. And it seems like if it's, you think about like a ball resting on top of like a hill, you want the ball to roll to the side of allowing you in your phone more than you want it to the side of saying no, because you might get upset and you throw your phone. It's very expensive to fix. But if it were something where you wanted to increase to a high assurance, maybe you started having, your cryptocurrencies, some NFTs that were particularly valuable, you had a non-custodial account, it was just stored on your device, you would want to increase those assurances. And so what you could look at then is the degree to which, like one efficacy measure would be the degree to which it looks at true positives. So how often does it get it right that you are you? How often does it get it wrong that you were, like a false positive? And then so on. And what you'd really be looking at is kind of fit for purpose. What do you want to do with the recognition? And then evaluate it for that. The other side of that factor that I just talked to you about is a whole area of research called adversarial machine learning. It's got a really cool, title, right? We call it ADML, ADML. And that notion would be how also robust is that AI model to fending off attacks like, poisoning the well. Maybe I slip in a whole bunch of data of my face into your phone, Don, so that I can slowly try to get it to be more accepting of me, right? And there's other ways of doing those types of things. Or maybe I attack your profile picture and start morphing it a little bit with my face, elements of my face, to make my attack easier in the long run. So those would be things you have to think about, is that robustness to attack. And then I know we have other questions, but there's, just putting it out there, there's a whole level of attack called a model inference and model abstraction attack. And that's another thing you could defend. I'll just leave it at this last one, where if I get a hold of your device, your AI model, your ML model, you can actually torture, maybe that's not the right word, but that's the way I think about it conceptually. You can torture the model. That is, you can, without having access to like the source code or the actual model, you can ask it questions in a way that will eventually reveal back the bits of information it's learned from, and I could re-extract your face. So if I get a hold of your AI model that contains your face, Don, I can extract your face and actually reprint it out. Right. So that's an interesting attack. And then there's defenses against those kind of attacks. And those would all be different ways to think about the efficacy of it, like the strength of it, and then how resilient it is, how safe is it. Right. So security and safety and privacy are the three areas I'd look at.
So the next question actually kind of tailed into that a little bit, and you were about to kind of go into maybe giving a little bit of an answer. So Cami BB has a question about how does the computer know it's me versus someone who looks like me? Now, the only thing that isn't, and I'm about to, there's a second part of that. The only thing is, I think the computer is being used as more general term, like how does the system know? Like, does it cross-reference my face with images that may be posted on Instagram? And I've actually seen some of this in action, and it's insane. But I'll kick off the answer with yes. There are networks that will spider everything you can think of, and pull your images together to composite your face. Like, I've seen that in action. It's scary stuff. What else can you add to that?
Well, and just to kind of riff off that composite, right? You've got like, partial view, obstructed view. Let's say right now we're wearing masks, and let's say you don't have a complete picture of my face. You would be able to take a composite from all the different angles out there, all the different areas, and then you would infer the rest, right? Computer models would basically infer, maybe you've never seen my chin, but you can guess what my chin would be like. And you can really get a composite and get a 3D composite of that. But the original question of how does anything know I am me is really both a technology question and a philosophy question. Because we're not static. We change over time. We're dynamic. So the philosophy part of the question always reminds me of this old philosophy professor that talked about the ship of Theseus problem. And I promise this makes sense. The idea would be that on a long voyage, you start with a wooden ship, but over time, elements of the ship rot or damage, and you replace them. At some point, maybe if you replace 90% of the ship with identical pieces, but is the ship still the same ship? We're the same thing, right? I'm shedding cells all over the place, right? I've got, my atoms are not the same atoms I had when I was born. And so physically, I'm really changing all over. And of course, we know that you can grow a beard, I can shave my head. And so AI models, especially facial recognition, have been trained to accommodate that notion that I might wildly change my hair. I might dye it purple. I might shave it right down the middle. I could grow a beard. I might put on glasses. I might wear a hat. I could wear a mask. And so they try to accommodate those things and look for what uniquely makes you you. These days, especially in COVID, that's focusing on this area right here around the eyes. So it would be with high resolution cameras. So now you get these like 12 megapixel cameras at high resolution, and they all have interesting lighting facilities on there, both infrared and visible spectrum lighting that they can bounce off and try to get a liveness test. So you can bounce off the underside of my eye and you'll get a really good, almost like a fingerprint of all the micro wrinkles and everything under my eye. Also, in the non-visible spectrum, you're bouncing the light off the camera off the inside of my eye, and the whites of my eyes actually have an area that has some of the most high assurance ability to uniquely identify me, right? But in the end of the day, it's not a secret. Right now, I'm on a high resolution camera. You all have access to that, so my face is not a secret thing, right? And so that's a problem in the sense that should that really be what's used to access, I don't know, my bank account or something really, really important to me without being able to also then validate, am I me, to your question? Maybe where I am in time and space is more important, that I'm sitting in this chair at this particular location. And then I think the future of this is really going to be about how you relate to your surroundings in time and space. Am I close to my device? Am I close to a computer? Am I close to where I usually am? So now you get into this notion of behavioral metrics. So you've got biometrics, right, based on my physiology, and then you've got cybermetrics, like based on my devices, right? Geez, browser has a fingerprint. Your device has a fingerprint. Your CPU and GPUs all have timing characteristics that are unique. And then you have interesting lag times. If I'm just send a packet off and ping you right now, I can look at the routing lags on that and try to figure out where everybody is, right? You combine that all, and now you get this composite that's not just about your image and your face, but a real cyber bio composite that's both visible and non-visible, which I think is very cool, but also you're going to have to look at how we protect that going forward, right?
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's before I get to the next question, there is a story that I got to share about my mother and my sister. So when they first got the iPhone with facial recognition, my mother set her phone up and everything. It was done, and my sister came into the room and they had the exact same phone. And my sister inadvertently grabbed my mother's phone and it unlocked on her face.
Right.
Without even a hesitation, it just unlocked. And
yeah,
I would say that you can tell my mother and sister are related. There's no doubt whatsoever. But no matter how my mother erased her facial recognition and recreated it, my sister could pick the phone up and it thought it was my mother every single time. Now, conversely, my mother couldn't get recognized on my sister's phone. So
yeah, and it's interesting to think about because one, it was trained on, let's just call it, Alice, and on the other one, it's trained on Sandra. And depending on where you start the training, remember again, matrix of pixels, find a pattern, match against pattern. They both started with different patterns, and yet one fell into what I would call that area of doubt, right? Where it had to make a choice. Is it Alice? Is it Sandra? I'm just making up those names. and it fell into this area where it could have just been off by like 0.5%.
Yep.
And on one phone, it just decided, yep, I'm okay with that. And the other one's like, nope, wrong. The ball rolled the wrong way.
My mother liked to look at it as her phone was more than welcome to recognize her if she was and made her feel younger, because on her phone even a younger looking version of her got her unlocked. So she's like, I must look young to my phone. Hey Darren, before you answer the next question, there's one thing that we remind everybody streaming on Twitch: you got to hydrate. So take a little water. I'll read the next question. So, good friend of my personal stream, Dishwa, here. Dishwa is a very smart engineer. He asks this question: what types of algorithms are used for facial recognition? The traditional strategy 10 to 15 years ago was based on principal component analysis. But with the AI ML revolution, are there other newer prevalent strategies?
Yeah, so PCA, principal component analysis, was kind of the way that I was trying to make it accessible to think about. And I described that for the face, right? You take this to a computer, just a whole bunch of dots, and you try to think about principal components. So like eyes, nose, mouth,
Right.
relation to each other. And so principal component analysis is very useful in many domains. For example, on a self-driving car, looking at a road and trying to identify things like a stop sign or another human or another car. But it has limitations. And then you start getting into other things. There's in image analysis, there's discrete, there's wavelets, there's discrete cosine transforms, there's all sorts of different things. But what I would like to say is they're basically all mathematical models, of which there are, I think I got a book behind me on the nature of mathematical modeling by Gershenfeld, great book. And it talks about like, how would you model anything from the smoke coming off of a candle, which is ridiculously hard, to a human face. And in some cases, some things are more dynamic than others, right? Smoke is moving in time and space, and it's very random. And a face is a little bit more static. So you're going to have things that you want to pick an algorithm that makes sense for you in terms of those elements we talked about before, like high assurance versus low assurance, low light versus high light, how much capture you have, how much training you can do. Like we sit in front of our thing, we can train. But if you can't do that, there's going to be different algorithms that make sense. This also gets to kind of the other elements too of like, well, gee whiz, what really makes sense? Do I want to use a neural network? And you can think about there's all sorts of neural nets right now. There's like these deep neurals, there's deep learning, there's like convolutional neural networks. There's a whole bunch of areas here. But just for the audience, I think what's interesting is if you think about a neural network, one of the earliest neural networks, even from 15, 20 years ago, that's still kind of popular as a concept today, is you think about neurons and you make a connection between something, and then you have this notion of back propagation that reinforces something. So that is, you would train this network of nodes, think about it as a mathematical function, and the more that it guesses right, in like a supervised training model, you reward it and back propagate that those weights were right. And so it's this notion of kind of continuously iterating and training to get better. What I think is interesting, though, isn't so much a particular algorithm for doing facial recognition these days. I like to think more about the inspiration for it, which is the human brain. And there's a lot of research in there about how do we actually recognize that you are you? Why is that? I mean, the human brain is really well designed to recognize a few things. One is faces, and the other is speech. And there's huge elements of our brain that are dedicated to that. And the face is unique. And I'll put out one little tidbit. One of the things that earliest happens in human development of a newborn is the ability to try to understand aggression and being, gee, should I be worried? Versus what they would call psychologically arousal. So there could be anxiety arousal from aggression, or arousal and happiness, and kind of that safety feeling. And a lot of it has to do with the recognition of a newborn of teeth. How much teeth are showing? Is it a smile, an upturned mouth? Or is it, kind of like, an aggressive scent? And of course, that's all just contextual. So I could riff on and on about that. We probably should at some point, but the algorithms are important. They're changing all the time. And then there's the notion, I'll just add one more thing, which is the recognition algorithms. Like there's a really good one from Oxford. And of course, all the big tech companies have their own versions of it. But then there's also these things that are generating deepfakes these days, like GANs. And that's a whole nother process we can go into.
We are going to go into, because I'm hoping we have time. We have one more question. I'm going to grab this one. So Araster Mom, Jellister Mom asks, and I know I butchered that. I'm just trying to go fast. Is there any game with a storyline around security of facial recognition systems or security of AI in general? Maybe something for Norton to consider. Well, it's funny that you should bring that up, because when Darren and I were talking through, having this conversation, one of the things I brought up right away was Watchdog Legions. I mean, Watchdog Legions was a game that I was super excited about, not just so much because it was another Watch Dogs and I really enjoyed the first one, but because of the way they created the AI and the NPCs in the game. And it's very unique. What they did was a huge leap forward in non-playing characters. And I think, unfortunately, it didn't get as much recognition from the non-gaming community that it should have, because what they were actually able to do was create an AI that uses machine learning that not only generated unique personalities but also generated unique faces. So no two NPCs in the game are alike at all. And if you think about what that means for facial recognition, you have to think about it inversely. So what they were essentially able to do was create hundreds of thousands of fake faces that, if you've ever played the game or watched any content on the game, are really pretty realistic. That they also created unique personalities for every single one. And that means that you could, because it's already built, it's in this game, have a human face generator, and the personalities were pretty good. So maybe you actually have a human being generator that was used inside of a game that likes to purport that it's very much about cyber, both on the attacking and defending side. But now we've already seen in practice an operating, functioning world, a world full of people that are unique and different, both in look and in personality. And what were to happen if someone were to take that type of technology that's being used in a game so that we can have some fun and have some diversity in our game, but then apply it somehow to the real world, inject that type of logic into a facial recognition system, and say they've captured 3 billion of the 7 billion people on Earth. Now they inject 150 billion fake people. And that's another way that you end up breaking, you could break facial recognition, is just by feeding it a bunch of faces that don't actually exist, based on a bunch of faces that exist, based on a bunch of AI that created a bunch of these faces that don't exist. So I think that's the first thing that comes to my head, Arister, when I think about that. And I'll tell you, I've always wanted to be able to design a game. I think right now, as Norton Gaming, we're really still focused on protecting gamers. Who knows? Maybe someday somebody will knock on our door and we'll go and work on a game with them that you guys will really enjoy. I mean, I'm sure everyone here, including our gaming council, where, by the way, one of our mods here, Babashan, is actually a Norton employee, and he's part of our Norton Gaming Advisory Council. And I'm sure the entire council would love to see us do more with an actual game. Another shout out to Vaughn, who's my personal mod on my channel, who also works for us in the mod community. Darren, one other question for you, buddy.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure I don't read this wrong. It's from Dishwa again, but it says, "Is Darren saying he could make himself a banana on stream?"
I can, but I can do it in two ways. So one would be to a human, presumably your audience mostly, I would still appear to be a human.
Well, that's a stretch, but okay.
The visual fidelity of me would remain, to a human, unchanged. But to a computer, I could be anything I want. And you know what, we should make that the giveaway next time, is like, we'll take someone's like selfie submitted for one of your folks, and we'll make them anything, like we'll make them whatever they want to be. They want to be like seen by most facial recognition as a lemur or like a zebra. We'll make that happen. Like
Wonderful.
that's a thing we could do.
All right,
So yes.
we'll have to do that. We'll have to do that next. You said something, and we have to talk about this because I think right now, if you look at the data of what gamers do when they're not gaming, a lot of us spend time on social media. And one of the things that we're seeing a lot more on social media that I'm actually pretty concerned about are deepfakes. And you know, I think there's a lot of people who don't understand deepfakes well. I think there's a lot of people who, probably not our audience. My guess is our audience understands what a deepfake is, but there's a lot of people who don't even know it exists. So they see these videos and just believe it, right? They've been trained to believe what they see because that's kind of what we do. We trust our eyes. You've got to share some thoughts on deepfakes, man. I mean, there's got to
Oh man,
be.
this is a fun topic.
Yeah, and I know we're running low on time, but this is one of those things where I
All
think
right.
we'd be remiss not to talk about.
We'll hit a few areas. One,
All right.
basically, there's a deep fake is the exact same thing you were explaining in Watchdogs Legion. It's a synthetic. It's a synthetic reality. Commonly deep fakes are known by putting, someone's face on someone else's body, and then you can have them say and do things that they never said or did in reality, right? And that's
Yeah.
where it got its kind of notoriety for disinformation campaigns, for some other things, but really, it's that notion of creating a synthetic, right? And I think early on in the deepfakes conversation, it's can we tell fake from real? I think that maybe lasts for another year or two where we still have that conversation of can I say if it's real or fake?
Hmm.
But to your point, when you talked about Watchdogs Legion, it's the same thing. The world is going to be flooded with synthetics, is my prediction. And when 80% of the content out there is synthetic, does it really make sense to decide whether it's real or fake? In fact, the EU today made an announcement about legislation that said that you may have to announce that everything that is a deep fake is a deep fake. Like you have to label it. And it's like putting a nutrition warning on there, like how much sugar is in your cereal.
Yeah, but
And
we know malicious actors aren't going to do that,
no, of course they're not going to do
right?
that. And I think the key points about deepfakes are okay, look, does this take a lot to do? And it used to, right? You go back 10 years ago, this is a Hollywood studio doing this. You go back 1 year ago, like a GPT-3, and it's, you can go on the internet, you can go find services right now. You can upload an audio sample from this Twitch stream, take the first 5 minutes of it, and you could probably, you know, have me say all sorts of weird things that I've never said before. Or you could probably create a video of it doing that. And that's how easy it is. We've had researchers in the lab, like, I want to see this. And they've created deepfake videos of me. And that's of course where you get into the scams where, you see this happening where an executive is deepfaked and it says, please transfer 500,000 or please pay this $5 million wire transfer. Or,
Yeah.
You see the crypto scams that were prevalent on social media earlier this year, right? So it's getting easier because one, everybody put their data out there about them, right? There's enough images of us and enough audio samples and recordings of us out there. That's the training, that's the fuel. Then there's enough engines that are widely accessible that anybody can basically go grab one of these engines and go create deepfakes. They rely on a technology called GANs, generative adversarial networks. And basically it's iterative. It tries to generate a you that's not you, and then it tries to fool another AI system into thinking it's you. That's the reverse facial recognition. And then if it rejects it and says, nope, I think it's a fake, the other one tries harder. And it keeps doing that until it fools itself. So the problem with that is it harnesses what's best about computers, which it has. You can throw so much horsepower at it, so much scalability at it, and so much time at it at this multiple level. So I can do this in the cloud on a cloud AI system, and I can create these things within seconds or minutes. That's really useful in some cases. Let's say I want to learn how to skateboard, and I want to see me pulling, a 1080. I could deep fake myself onto Tony Hawk's body and see what it would be like for me to do that kind of trick. Right? Maybe that helps me learn. But also maybe it makes it easier to do things that are going to help fool people, right? There's a one called Deepfake Lab, Deep Face Lab, that basically can do that in videos really easily. And so I think that accessibility is really harsh.
Yeah.
When we think about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, and the thing is, we helped them do this, right? So I think back to, and this is where I want our audience to start tying these things in that you're talking about to their lives, right? So I don't remember when it was, couple few years ago when they started with those face swapping apps that everyone thought was
Yeah.
hysterical, right? Oh, this is so funny. Where do you think that data was going? How do you think companies make money?
Right.
Like, do you
Or the
think,
aging apps, right?
oh,
Hey, just give me your
the
face.
aging apps, right? It's like, what? So I'm a company, which means there's some number of people working here that have to buy food and pay to live in a building and have to have technology, so they have to make money. They release an app that costs you nothing. You then use that app to show it your face, show it someone else's face, swap the faces, and you begin the process of giving them the faces to do facial recognition work with, giving them the faces and the swapped faces so that they can start doing deep fake work. And I saw, I can't remember the name of it. It's a series on Hulu that is a documentary series. And they had one episode where they took one of these companies and a watchdog group took them apart. And what they found out is they were taking all of this data that was from one of these fun, quote unquote, fun apps, and they were using it to power this facial recognition thing that they were selling to the government.
Yeah.
And it basically fueled them in a very, very fast way to have a bunch of faces that they needed to do facial recognition, a bunch of face swaps that they could do deep fakes with, and test that the deep fakes were working. To what you just said, right? You have to fool, the system has to fool itself until it can't fool itself anymore. Well, as individuals, we fed it all the data they needed, right? And it cost them nothing, right? Data fuels consumer projects, data fuels the creation of new products, and whether it's for good or bad. And I think when we're downloading an app on our phone and we're going to present it with our likeness, our family's likeness, or our location, you really have to think about what value are you getting from that for yourself versus the value you're giving the person on the other side of that. The last thing I'll say on that is I used to speak, I still do, it's all remote now, but when I would speak at high schools, I would tell the kids, yeah, you all moved to Snapchat. This is a couple of years back, right? You all moved to Snapchat because they tell you they don't save any of your images, and I'm telling you that's bullcrap. And literally, like a year later, Snapchat got sued because they had backup data of all these faces, right? So it's
It
like,
was never ephemeral. Yeah.
yeah,
They
yeah,
stored it.
exactly, right? So it's, I think for those of us who are on Twitch streaming, for those of us who consume this, you're putting your face out there. Make sure you're putting it out there for a reason that gives you the biggest value. But don't forget that these other things, they exist, right? And we shouldn't be surprised when we see, as you just put it, simple deep fake capabilities and go, how did they do that? Why is it so easy? Well, because we gave it to them, right? We
Yeah.
we
And by the
fed
way,
the
we should
machine.
probably have the right to be forgotten from that, right? So maybe
Oh
I show
yeah.
up in Watchdog's Legion because it was trained on all of our faces. And maybe I think it's awesome and I love it,
Yep.
but maybe I want to be removed from that. And that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't understand yet is AI, like a human brain, has the ability to forget. And so we would be able to mathematically to surgically go into that model
Yeah.
and remove that. I mean, look, you could always say, "Oh, just retrain it." But if you're training on 7 billion faces, do you really want to retrain all the time? I doubt it. But that idea of being able to mathematically say, "Hey, look, I'm in someone's model, learn from me. I want to be out of it." And
Yeah.
that's an interesting concept, right? It'd be like me saying, "Okay, I went into a library, then I lit the library on fire. Don't do that. And all the books are gone. Does that mean all the knowledge is gone? No.
Right.
It's in my head, right? But do I have the ability to forget some of that stuff? Because remember that torturing technique, I could extract all of it, right? I've read Shakespeare before. I could probably put out maybe a few phrases from it, but other people could do better. But that notion of maybe I could forget it too. And so that ability to be taken out of these things is another interesting possibility,
Sure.
right? That could be offered.
Yeah, I and And for Babashan had a question, and yes, Snapchat did change its terms of services after that to say they are saving the data, right? They just came out and said it because they had to. Um, you
Right. There's an
know,
FTC
yeah,
order.
they didn't have a choice. There's another question from Dishwa. So, do you think privacy laws like ones in the EU actually address the hidden data mining that is so prevalent in modern apps? I think you and I both have an opinion on that. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think the one that was most interesting, it's not a current legislation, but it's been proposed today, um, is that ability to more deeply understand, have transparency into the model. So instead of thinking about it as like a closed box that you can't see into, that ability for auditors and regulators to look into that and say, hey, are there biases here that shouldn't be? Could you have your information removed? Right. So there's some interesting regulations are happening here. Some of our researchers actually at NortonLifeLock had sat down with EU regulators to explain this. So I think it first starts with you have to fully understand what's possible in technology for good and bad. Then I always love to focus on the good, but I also have to, it's incumbent upon me, given our position, to always think about, but what would an adversary do? Because they generally would break all the rules, right?
Yeah.
There are no rules. That's why you're doing that. And how could they use it in a way that no one's ever thought about? And then present both of those sides to policymakers to inform them, right? Because they're supposed to serve the public and say, okay, how do we make the right choices based on a better understanding of what's possible and not just saying, okay, well, it's either one or the other. We're going to throw the baby out with the water. Of course not. We love the all the things that AI can do for good in the world. And then how do we just make sure we protect and keep things safer? So I always say smart things should get smarter, but they should also get safer. And let's just make sure we demand that, right? Let's just demand to be safe.
Yeah, totally. I honestly think the hidden data mining can't be stopped because ultimately, as Darren just put it, you know, people that are working on the good side who are trying to do good things using this technology will always be countered by people who maybe let's not say they're doing bad things, but they're doing things that maybe to them aren't bad, but ultimately to the safety of all of us and our privacy are bad. And I think when you have, like
Yeah. Or they're just
GDPR,
unanticipated,
oh,
right?
that's the other one. They didn't expect it to go where it went,
And
right?
they develop emergent properties that can be wonderful or not so good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's where it gets, you almost feel bad for the creator, but it's how they respond to those emergences that really matter. But ultimately, if you so I just to test it made a request of some company that sent me something, said, would you like to remove your data or at least see what we have? So I went through the process and it was very cumbersome and laborious to get it done. And I finally just got a note saying, okay, we've gathered all the data we have about you, and I haven't looked at it yet. But here's the thing: there are so many different systems out there that have your data. You can't do it alone. I don't
Yeah,
think
you
there's
cost
any
you too many of
way.
those systems a day.
That's a whole problem, right? Like you a great story is I was out at a work conference in Las Vegas. I went to a restaurant I'd never been to before. Okay, it's a steakhouse. They're pretty famous. I can't remember the name. So we're at the steakhouse, and the owner happened to be there. The manager. They were visiting tables. They visited us. You know, our food came out at the same time, and the person I was with, my cousin's, his food looked awful. It was Del Frisco Steakhouse, beautiful, lovely. I love the place. And she was the owner is standing there, and she looked at it and went, "What did you order?" And he told her, and she called somebody over and went, "This is horrible. Bring him two. I want you to bring him two of them." Well, we leave, thank you very much, and just leave. I get to my office back in Boston, and there's a card that's been mailed to my office, and it's actually from the restaurant, from our waitress, addressed to me by name, fully handwritten, thanking us for visiting the restaurant. I was in charge of security for the company. Now I'm sitting there wondering, did I leave my business card? No. I used my corporate credit card, but I gave them no other information about me. And what we were able, after making a couple phone calls to my incident response team and a few other people, we were basically able to cobble together that they had used the Las Vegas database, this information that exists that they all have about everything you do in Las Vegas. We're able to find out where I work, that I was there for a conference, what the address of the company was. They had my name off the credit card and they were able to send it. Well, it gets even creepier because 2 or 3 years later, back in Las Vegas, back at Del Frisco's, back with my cousin, the owner happens to be there again, and she walks up to our table and she goes, "Wait a minute, I remember you." And my cousin, "When you do?" She said, "Yeah, you had that prime rib that looked disgusting. I sent it back and sent you two." And he was like, "Yeah, that's me." And it just goes to show you that when you're talking about defeating these systems, humans are a system as well. This
Yes.
woman, out of the, I don't know how many customers she's met in her life, years later, remembered my cousin by face, knew exactly the scenario that we were a part of, and what her part was in it, what his part was in it. So not only did they use technology to find me and engage me, which is creepy, but this woman still had me in her head. So can you defeat the baseline data mining? Well, to some degree, yes. But I think to some degree, Pandora's box is open. And now we have to do what Darren said. We have to think about our safety and make sure we're doing everything we can to protect it, and that good companies and good people, outside of the emergent technology that could happen, we need to be working towards keeping people safe. That's why we exist as Norton, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with 9 minutes left, and listen, I want everybody to really know, like, Darren is insanely busy. He was, kind enough to slice an hour out of his day for us, but he does have to get back to something, so he's going to leave us at 2 o'clock. What are your final thoughts on this, and how would you kind of conclude where we are? Maybe a little something about where we're going with this.
Yeah, and look, and some of this is driven by the questions you got from the audience, right? We talked about how technology is changing the world around us, and then a little bit hint about where the world is going, how we're going to change in response to the world changing. So we put a lot of personal information out there. Some of it can be used in really good ways. Facial recognition. We saw how it's being used to make, NPCs more interesting in games, right? It could just be not even just faces, but their gaits, their behaviors, and the way they interact. But I think the future of that, as we talk about deep fakes, there's dangers and there's good out of it, is basically this idea of synthetic or divergent realities. And that is that in many ways, we are no longer experiencing the same reality that 50 years ago we would have done. 50 years ago, we would have been on a video conferencing system. You and I would have done this, and we would have been in the same room. It would have been the same temperature. We would have felt the same breeze if the window was open. And so all of that context is really interesting about how we share the world and the time and space we live in. What technology does is it allows us to scale through time and space, right? I can be where you are, I can be where everybody is together. And yet it might be snowing in one place, sunny in another, nighttime at one place. That only gets more interesting in a digital world where anybody in the digital world can create whatever they want. That's the fascination of it, right? You want a world where you have a house with 1 billion doors? Sure, build it. And behind those 1 billion doors, there are another 1 trillion doors? Yeah. By the way, we used to create dilemma warfare scenarios for that, for defense systems, right? So a lock in the digital world doesn't need to have a deadbolt. I might make it really difficult to find which door out of 1 trillion doors, behind of 1 trillion doors, behind of 1 trillion doors, et cetera, actually has what I keep there. And only if I know the path can I get there within any reasonable amount of time. But more important, I think, is, and I'm not saying we should share the same reality all the time, but how do we talk together if we're not seeing and experiencing the same things? I think that could be interesting. For this group, how do we game together? We're already doing that, right? We may be experiencing different sides of the games, right? And I don't want to like ruffle any feathers, but maybe I've got a code, maybe I've accelerated something, maybe I'm using something so I can see around corners. That might be part of the game. That might be cheating, and it's like, okay, well, how do I know with that? How do I even know that it's happening? I see this happening from everything from grandmasters at chess tournaments all the way to, everyday games right now that are far more, I was going to say more complex than like just detecting cheating and chess, but I really don't know that. But how is it going to be where, and just to put it out there, like, let's say I'm walking down the street with one of my children, and we're both wearing some kind of augmented reality. So we're getting a mix of the physical world. Let's say there is a physical street and we're actually physically moving on it, but I am choosing to have all the pollution removed out. It's filtering. And maybe I don't want to see like literally rose colored glasses. I only want to see Ferraris lining the street. My daughter wants to see, Volkswagens lining the street. How do we make sure that we can talk about what we're experiencing, the good and the bad, in a world in which we don't all share what we're doing at the same time? Even I think that's a really interesting thing, is you start fast forwarding, what does it mean to have synthetics? And I guess the bigger question there is really related to what you said, Bob. It's, there's devices, there's networks, but there's always the human. Okay. And the human has an operating system that's been in development for a long time. We know it has bugs, it has 0 days. And in a world where humans are interacting with a lot of, it's going to get interesting to figure out, what do you trust? Can I trust to do something with someone? Can I trust to get this in-game currency, this in-game asset? If I get it, will it really be mine? Will it be unique? That's that whole conversation of NFTs. But really, at the end of the day, we talked a lot about AI today, but remember, AI was based on humans and humans are fallible. I don't know about you. I don't see a lot of news these days about armored truck robberies, but somehow people can't help but getting scammed without assistance to sending money to someone who can con them. And that's really where a lot of the energy is being spent right now, of how can I help protect this operating system, the one behind the eyes, behind the ears, behind my senses, from being attacked in a world in which everything is presented to my senses, whatever senses I may have. I may not have all my senses. I may hear. How can I help people? How can we help people know what is good for them without making that decision? Really give them almost like that. I'm going to date myself here. That Iron Man augmented suit that makes them safer, that helps them make better decisions in their best interest and helps keep them safe. That's what I think is really interesting going forward. Right.
Well, I'm going to tell you that that concept of divergent realities is plays very heavily in the gaming community. So I would very much like to invite you back. We'll look at our schedules, because I think that
Yeah.
that topic will blow minds, dude. I think when you really start to dig into the divergent realities and what it means to so many different things, be it how we play games, how do we interact with each other, globalization overall. Like we have people in my gaming group that don't live in the United States, right? They live in other countries, and there's news that you learn from them that you aren't hearing in your country. And when those realities start to get closer and closer to at least understanding where each other's reality is, you start empathy. And with that empathy, you start to bring in a whole new level of appreciation for people around the world. And I believe that that starts to break down the barriers of this country and this country have bad relations. Yeah, but the people within the country don't. And the more we are taking those divergent realities and finding common ground in them, I think the more we start to realize that people are pretty much the same everywhere, which is why in gaming, we have crews like ours. We have people from France and Ireland and the Netherlands and Australia and Japan and China and the United States,
All
Canada,
over.
all over the place, just in my little gaming group, right? We have everybody. And if you look at, as you scale those up in size, you have even bigger distributions of people. So yeah, I think that'd be a great conversation if you wouldn't mind
I'd
coming
love
back.
to. We can even bring in neuroconstruction theory, right? Why do we have these gaps in our head that allow us to be fooled? Why is it that we don't see the nose in front of our face, right?
Yeah.
And unless we actually look for it. And it's going to be that in gaming, which is, I think gamers are actually going to be probably the most comfortable with synthetics, the most empathetic to non-human entities, and probably be able to enable it in the safest way possible as we start looking at how do we enjoy this, but also be safe. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Darren, thank you so much, everybody. Darren Shou, Chief
Thanks,
Technology
man.
Officer here at Norton, and we're just,
So fun.
yeah, man, we really appreciate you. Everybody is thankful for having you have shown up today. Thanks, buddy.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure. All mine, all mine.
All right, cool. All right, everybody. So I'm going to sign off as well. I want to thank you all for attending. Make sure you're following. Thank you for the amazing questions and the lively chat. We appreciate all of you. Darren, you can sign off because I know you got to go. So I had Darren captured in Discord. So yeah, I just want to thank you all very much. Make sure you follow. You'll see that there's a schedule down below me. You can see some of the other really talented streamers that'll be taking over our channel and doing great stuff. I do apologize. I kind of felt like I was looking down a lot, and it's because my camera is here, but Darren was down here, so I was trying to keep an eye on him. Thank you for all the kind words, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you again in 3 weeks. I'll be doing this again. I'm going to bring on another special guest. Remember, we're going to mix up these master classes. Maybe there'll be some gameplay. Maybe there'll just be some conversation. But ultimately, this is for you guys to get the opportunity to learn cool stuff and maybe use it in your everyday life and keep yourself safe. So once again, I just want to I want to check one thing before we go. We've got some friends out there that stream as well. They're friends of NortonLifeLock. I'm gonna do a quick check and see if anybody's streaming right now. It looks like pretty much everybody is offline. Oh no, they're not. I just haven't followed them on this account. So, and if we can raid you guys over there and get you some channel points, they are. No, I'm actually following every single one of them. So they're not up right now. Thank you all. We will, come back to the channel, check out our other streamers, check out even Barbashan streams on channel so you can check out an actual Norton gamer. Keep yourself safe, be safe, wear a mask, do all the great things. We all want to be able to get together at TwitchCon E3. I want to see your faces in person. You're all wonderful. To my crew who showed up for the support, both from Norton as well as from DAG, it's wonderful having you. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week. Okay, that didn't work.